After watching the new Netflix series about Ed Gein, I have to admit I felt pretty disgusted, and not because it was graphic. I think I'm not the only one, given the series' bad reputation, which is a relief. However, there is this message the series tries to convey that I can't stand. One, I really want to refute because I consider it dangerous, dishonest, and completely stupid. Ed Gein was a poor kid, and you're supposed to feel sorry for him. He's not responsible for his crimes. The blame lies with the mental health system, the violence on TV, his upbringing, and so on. I'm the first to say that all those things contribute to the development of criminals like this. Don't get me wrong. But there's a huge difference between explaining how certain events can affect a person and justifying their actions because of those events. In this video, I'm not only going to truthfully explain this guy's psychological profile, but I'm also going to tell you why he doesn't deserve even an ounce of your pity. This man wasn't a gentle monster, as the actor who portrays him describes him as. He was simply a murderous degenerate. To understand a person's mind, the first step is their childhood, and for murderers, this is especially true. Ed Gein's childhood was very happy. He was surrounded by kind and responsible people who made him feel loved and not just him. You're a member of this channel, you know how this goes. Like almost all serial killers, Gein's childhood was excessively traumatic. Edward Theodore Gein was born in La Crosse County, Wisconsin on August 27, 1906. On one hand, we have his father, a man who did various manual jobs such as woodwork. But this isn't important to us. His paternal figure isn't relevant as a handyman, but as a violent alcoholic who used to beat his children severely, especially Ed, who was the youngest and most submissive. These beatings left him with hearing and speech problems, but more importantly, they caused drastic changes in his perception of the world. To fully understand his father's influence, we must first understand his mother's, his defender, the object of his deepest admiration, and ironically, also his abuser. Her abuses were far more profound than his father's. They were of a more sinister nature because, unlike his, they weren't motivated by anger, but by a religious fervor that went beyond obsession or strict rules. Fanaticism. That's the word that best defines Augusto Gein. Do you know what's the problem with fanaticism? There are several, of course, but in my opinion, there is one main reason why I consider fanaticism, whether political or religious, to be utterly terrifying. A fanatic is entirely justified by what they believe in. They are not only a slave to their ideals, but nothing else matters to them. Every action is noble if it's done in favor of their beliefs. If you were to confront a regular selfish criminal, the possibility of negotiation exists. After all, their own well-being is paramount. To give you an example, if someone breaks into your house and finds a gun pointed at their head, you could probably convince them to leave. If a serial killer wants to avoid the death penalty, they are likely willing to confess their crimes and cooperate with the authorities to achieve it. We've seen examples of this many times, but a fanatic is different. When dealing with such a person, any possibility of negotiation vanishes completely. Fanatics don't care about losing their lives for their ideals. They don't care about sacrificing the lives of others, even completely innocent people. No, they are prepared to commit any atrocity if necessary, and they never hesitate, never consider the morality or logic behind their actions, never bother to offer explanations because, as I said before, they have a divine or noble reason that justifies and transcends the rest of the world. I'm talking about people who would gladly embrace a bomb or set themselves on fire if it were for that divine reason. I want you to imagine a mother like that. What would be more important, her children or her beliefs? I think the answer is quite clear. Augusto Gein belonged to a very specific old branch of Lutheranism, which is itself a branch of Protestant Christianity, but the religion itself isn't the problem. is the way Augusta interpreted the faith. Instead of focusing on the positive aspects of Christianity, her philosophy was very different from everything the religion stands for. She considered all humans to be sinners, people who should devote their lives to repenting and seeking God's forgiveness. Do you live in a city? Congratulations, you're a disgusting sinner. Do you drink alcohol or like to go out at night? Congratulations, you're a disgusting sinner. Did you have sex before you were married? Congratulations. Not only are you a disgusting sinner, but you're also a disciple of the devil. There is no connecting thread between the things Augusta considered sin, or at least I can't identify it. Behind her facade of piety, she was hiding nothing more than a deep misanthropy. To give you an idea, Augusta insisted on moving to an isolated farm because she considered cities to be beds of sin. Once she moved, she sent her children to a small school with only 12 students. If her children tried to socialize and make friends or talk to anyone outside the family or school, Augusta would beat and verbally abuse them, calling them sinners and telling them that if they continued like this, they would end up burning in hell forever. Augusta hated her husband as well. She considered him a weak man because of his alcoholism and his personality. In fact, she considered all men weak and sinful. Once, when Ed was 12, she found him masturbating and squeezed his genitals with all her might, telling him those organs were the curse of man. One would think she simply hated men, but she had very strong opinions about women as well. She considered them the root of sin, that which caused man to turn away from God simply by existing. If her sons had any physical contact with a woman, however slight or accidental, or dared to try to speak to one, Augusta again would beat them and call them sinners. I'm not sure if Augusta considered that she herself was also a woman. But as I said before, fanatics never question or consider the logic behind their actions. Ed was very attached to his mother, however. He was obsessed with her, and to him, every one of her words were strict rules that he made sure to follow. Ed Gein's reality was constructed using his mother's twisted philosophy as its foundation. So there you have it, right? It's his mother's fault, as the show says, and Gein was just a poor victim who never had a choice. Well, we know for sure that wasn't the case. Ed's older brother, Henry, went through literally the same thing. He was born into the same environment and grew up under the same circumstances. He wasn't treated differently or given any privileges. He was a victim of the same abuse as his younger brother. But he decided that his mother's words and his father's behavior were a problem. So he chose to study and work to get away from that and start his own life as quickly as possible. Those who experience physical and psychological abuse in childhood are definitely affected by the trauma that it entails, but they never lose their power of decision or their will, except in very specific situations. Humans never lose the ability to choose what they think is right and the actions they take. It's important to keep that in mind throughout this video. To conclude this part of his life, his father died first from a lung disease. Augusta didn't show a shred of grief about it. Then, Henry was next. Henry had started dating a woman and was about to move in with her. He told Ed that his relationship with his mother, his obsession with her, and the dynamics of the family were unhealthy, which deeply affected the young man. One day, while the brothers were burning weeds growing on the farm, Henry disappeared. When the police arrived, Ed led them directly to the body, which showed no signs of burning, but did show signs of having received a blow to his head. Who knows what could have happened? I have a theory, of course, but officially his death was ruled accidental. Finally, it was Augusta's turn. She died of a heart attack in 1945. This death was the only one that truly affected Gein. It devastated him and was what we call the breaking point. The event that leads these criminals to finally act instead of just fantasizing. Augusta was the only person Ed loved and respected. She was his entire world, so losing her further damaged the young man's already disturbed mind. We could analyze his psychological profile right now, but I think it would make more sense to do so after hearing about what he did next. At some point in his life, Gein developed an obsession with human anatomy and corpses. It's not known exactly when, but many speculate it was when he saw pictures of soldiers killed in World War II. According to the Netflix show, these photos were the cause of this macabre fascination, but that's absolutely false. Gein's obsession with corpses had existed within him for a long time. The photos simply made him notice it, in the same way that a boy seeing an adult magazine for the first time becomes aware of his own sexuality. Had he not seen these images, any other graphic display of violence would have had the same effect. This small spark gradually escalated during the course of the events we discussed earlier. Eventually, he began buying magazines detailing extremely graphic crimes and material containing atrocities committed by the Germans in World War II. This included things like cannibalism, grave robbing, satanic cults, and shrunken heads. Once he lost his mother, this was all he had left. His world was completely empty except for this obsession. These conditions were what allowed it to grow until it consumed every aspect of his life, nothing less than an addiction. The first thing he did was desecrate his mother's grave and try to recover part of her body, but despite repeated attempts, he was unable to do so because the coffin was protected by a layer of concrete. Then, frustrated, he turned his attention to the graves of other women who resembled his mother and were of a similar age at the time of their death. He began scanning the obituaries in local newspapers looking for recently buried women who fit that profile. From 1947 until at least 1952, Gein made more than 40 visits to cemeteries around the area. According to him, he only desecrated 9 graves on those visits. But that doesn't make sense when you compare it to the number of human remains that were later found in his house. You're probably wondering, what did he do with the corpses? Well, contrary to popular belief, he didn't practice necrophilia or cannibalism. Instead, he decided to use them as materials for arts and crafts. He made soup bowls from skulls. He preserved individual organs in jars. He crafted various pieces of furniture from human bones and skin, including chairs, lamps, and masks. But his most important creation, the project he was proudest of, was a woman's costume made from parts of women who resembled his mother, a belt made from nipples, a corset and pants made from human skin he had cured himself, and a mask that, once again, was made from a woman's face and patches of real human skin. The vast majority of these so-called works were composed of body parts that Gein obtained from his routine nightly visits to cemeteries, but others contained fresher parts, so to speak. Eventually, Gein ran out of materials. After digging through cemeteries for years, there were no more graves of women who resembled his mother left to desecrate. So he decided to murder women to get them. In his mind, that would be more effective than simply waiting for them to appear in the obituaries. In 1954, Gein committed his first confirmed murder. The victim was a 51-year-old woman named Mary Hogan, who, unsurprisingly, looked similar to his mother. Gein shot her with a rifle and took her body back to the farm. In 1957, he committed his second confirmed murder, the one that led to his arrest. This one was exactly the same. The victim, Bernice Warden, was 58 years old and, once again, resembled his mother. She was shot with a rifle and her body taken to the farm. I'm sure you have many questions, and now it's the time to answer them, since we finally have all the necessary context to put together the true psychological profile of Ed Gein. First, it's important to understand his perception of others. For Gein, the rest of humanity was simply a pile of bones and organs. His only interaction with the outside world since childhood had been through anatomy books, after all. Not to mention that his mother had taught him that basically everyone was a sinner, including his father. So for Gein, only she was worthy of consideration. Everyone else was going to end up burning in hell. Their only value was as materials for crafting. One could see this as a state of psychotic dissociation, and while psychosis was involved, Gein's personality was rather antisocial. This means that he not only lacked empathy for others, but he saw them as inferior and hated them. Gein's world was very small when he was a child. Aside from his family, he had interacted with only about 8 people by the time he reached puberty, and almost everyone he did know had mistreated him, both at home and at school. When he asked his mother for help, she told him to avoid socializing and associating with people for the reasons I've already told you, even telling him that his father was pathetic and was going to hell, literally, word for word. This is how he formed this association in his mind between mistreatment and sin and everyone who wasn't his mother. Basically, why are people mean to me? Because they are sinners. And how can I avoid it? By avoiding people, because everyone is a sinner. I mentioned earlier that psychosis was a factor, and this is because Gein was diagnosed with schizophrenia, psychosis being a common symptom of this disorder. Now, it's important that you understand 2 things about Ed Gein. The first is that he was smarter than he seemed, and definitely smarter than how he's portrayed in the series. And the second is that he was a liar. He claimed all his crimes were committed while in a trance and that he had no memory of the events, later changing his story and leading officers to 9 specific graves he had desecrated. He said the same thing about his 2 confirmed murders, but as time passed, he changed his version of events again. First, he said he hadn't killed anyone. Once they found the body, he said he had killed that woman, but only her, and he couldn't remember the details. Then, he said he remembered some things and that it had been an accident. Later, when they found the remains of the first victim in his house, he admitted to killing her, but again, claimed he had no memory of the situation. Schizophrenia is a disorder that is often exaggerated in fiction for dramatic effect. But as someone who has worked with and is friends with people with schizophrenia, let me tell you that is not how the disorder works. The general perception of a schizophrenic is that of someone with complete dementia, an individual who experiences hallucinations and constantly hears voices, living almost in a fantasy world, no control over their actions. What I just described is an episode of extremely severe psychotic delusion that occurs very rarely and, again, is more closely related to dementia. Schizophrenia is a complex topic, but for the purposes of this video, you only need to know that it causes a person to hear voices, have intrusive thoughts, and experience mild psychotic episodes. But it doesn't take away their control over their actions, not even without medication. Even if we were to assume that the reason he killed his victims and desecrated graves was due to psychotic episodes, that doesn't explain why he took the bodies and made chairs from them. To give you an example, if a person started hallucinating and felt threatened as a result of a psychotic episode, it's not impossible that, while trying to defend themselves from a perceived threat, they might accidentally kill someone. But it is impossible that afterwards they would erase the evidence, take the body, and make lampshades from it. Finally, we must discuss his fascination with corpses and his mother. Gein had an Oedipus complex. Having lived in isolation for most of his life, the only woman he had contact with was his mother, who fostered his antisocial personality by telling him that women were servants of the devil, etc. He said he wanted to become his mother, that this was the reason he made the woman suit. This could be for 2 reasons. First, his mother was the only authority figure he respected, and by becoming her, he could acquire a sense of power. Second, Since sex was considered sinful, he manifested his sexual frustrations by literally wanting to be inside her skin. His obsession with his mother is something we can somewhat explain, but it is impossible to know why he expressed his sexuality with human bodies and parts. We can only say that it was definitely a sort of fetish. Even if he didn't practice necrophilia, the desire to be in constant contact with human skin, bones, and organs is clearly sexual in nature. In summary, we have a man who resents and feels no empathy for the rest of humanity, yet went unnoticed and avoided raising suspicion for 20 years, with a sexual fascination with death, who had a codependent relationship with his mother, for whom he harbored romantic feelings. He had undiagnosed schizophrenia, and he was a habitual liar. As you can see, schizophrenia is the least related trait to his crimes. At that time, it wasn't as well understood, and Gein took advantage of this, playing the fool who didn't know what he was doing. This is how he got himself sent to a psychiatric hospital instead of prison, and although he was later deemed sane enough to attend the trial and have his sentence changed, too much time had already passed. There is much to say about Ed Gein. His behavior remains something we don't fully understand, and his case is definitely horrific. We can say that his childhood was terrible and that his parents were awful. And we can also say that mental health was extremely lacking at that time. But what we can never say is that this man was innocent and was simply a victim without free will. Gein knew what he was doing and would have continued doing it had he not been caught. Not even all the abuse in the world can justify his actions. This man does not deserve your pity. As always, my friend, much love, and I hope you're alright. If I was 18, I would